Railway Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hey, I'm Doc Frank. Welcome to my podcast where every week I'm presenting you authentic, spontaneous and unrehearsed discussions with interesting guests from the rail industry about topics that matter. Make sure you subscribe and tell your friends about it, as this podcast will both educate and entertain them. Thank you for listening. My guest today is Tiff Lykke from Melbourne in Australia. Tiff has started her career in railway in a quite unusual way, coming from entirely outside the industry. I believe this episode will be important to understand how a career in railway can be started, especially how you can start and develop your career in railways if you are a woman. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, this is Doc Frank again. I just wanted to let you know again of the arguably best CBTC conference that has ever been held, the CBTC World Summit 2023, with 18 speakers from 13 different countries. It was a mega event in September this year, and you now have access to the official recording where you can see all the presentations, all the question and answers after the presentations, and even the VIP fireside chats that were exclusively for VIP attendees during the conference. But you can have all of this now lifelong on demand. You can watch it whenever you want, from wherever you want, and how often you want. Don't miss this opportunity and sign up to the best CBTC conference ever on docfranktraining.podia.com/CBTC World Summit 2023. I repeat that, docfranktraining.podia.com/CBTC World Summit 2023. If you want one recommendation from me on CBTC, that is it. The best content of the year by a mile. Don't miss it. Tiff Lykke, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here today.
Very welcome. You have been recommended to me to have you on that show by a previous guest of mine, Lisa Hockman, and we will probably talk about the relationship with Lisa to some extent a bit further on when we talk about your joint experience in the Melbourne Airport Rail project. But what I wanted to start with is your path into the railway industry, which is probably not quite the normal thing where like people start as an apprentice in British Rail when they are 16 or something like that. I think in your case, it was a bit different. You started somewhere else. You worked in retail before. Tell us a little bit how you got in the railway industry and particularly why.
Yeah, I started my working career in road transport. I worked for TNT Express, well-known company around here. Started in the office doing, just administrative type work. And then an opportunity came up to go out and actually drive the trucks and do deliveries. And I thought that would be a great opportunity. So I stuck my hand up for that. And they gave me the job. They trained me to drive trucks. So I did that for a few years. Absolutely loved that. That was a great job. I loved being out and about and kind of interacting with people. So that was good. I then stepped up into a supervisor's role. So I was looking after anywhere between kind of 15 and 20 of the drivers, making sure that everything got done each day. Then I kind of moved back into a little bit more of an administrative role, looking after what they call the debrief section, which is where the drivers bring back their paperwork at night. We make sure everything gets back into the system. So a little bit of a cross between my operational knowledge and my administrative knowledge. I then decided that I wanted to move up to Brisbane from Sydney, where I grew up. I moved up there without a job and actually found it really, really hard to get a job up there. I found that nobody would give me an interview for a truck driving job, a supervisor's job. I just wasn't getting anything. Thankfully, my sister was working for a retail company at the time, and managed to actually get me a role, just a casual role, working in their warehouse. So I went in there and I was actually able to help them out with some of their transport problems with my road transport background. So I helped them sort that out. But while I was working there, a role came up with Horizon up in Queensland, which was Queensland Rail at the time. So I got my foot in the door at railway there, working as what they called a freight coordinator, which was ironically nothing to do with freight, but was making sure that all the drivers were where they needed to be, assigning drivers to trains, making sure that there was cars available for them to get out and relieve other drivers partway through runs, making sure that all the paperwork was done, all the information was in all the computer systems, all that kind of fun stuff. And at some point while I was doing that, I thought that what the drivers was doing looked kind of fun. So when an opportunity came up, I stuck my hand up for a train driver's role, and was lucky enough to get it. So that's where my career driving trains started, up with the coal trains and freight trains out of Port of Brisbane. And that was the start of my railway career.
When you remember back the time of your interview with Horizon, do you think they took you because of your logistics experience from TNT and your experience with coordinating drivers? And they said, well, yeah, truck drivers, train drivers, it's not the same, but it's not too far apart either. Do you think that played a role?
Yeah, I think that definitely helped. Kind of having worked in a highly unionised environment before, I think that really helped coming into rail.
Why did you apply for this job in rail? Did it just sound interesting, or did it just seem to be better than the retail job that you did at the time?
Look,
I rephrase this. Did you ever aim for the railway industry, or was it more by accident?
I think it was a little bit by accident, possibly a little bit of a subconscious thing. I have always enjoyed driving different things. So, I've got my car license. I learnt to drive trucks. I've got my motorcycle license. I dabbled with, being on ships. So I think I have just an affinity for driving things. So whether that was a conscious decision or a subconscious thing, guiding me towards something else that I could drive. But I think mainly I was just struggling to get a job, and it was a job, it was a company that was willing to give me a job. So it looked good.
Yeah. Why did you think that you found it so hard in Brisbane to find a job coming from Sydney? Did you think it was a bit like a Queensland versus New South Wales thing, or what? I was actually surprised. Normally, if you have experience in driving trucks, it should. I've never been a truck driver, but I could imagine that it shouldn't be too hard to find a job in a different state doing the same thing, which I'm sure you tried.
Yeah, in theory, it shouldn't be too hard, but I think at that point, truck driving was, well, and I guess to a certain degree it really still is, but it was very, very male dominated. So I think people would just see the name Tiffany on a resume and just assume that, I wasn't going to be able to lift things, or, that I wasn't physically capable of doing the job. So I think that certainly didn't help.
Right. That triggers a question that I wanted to ask you anyway. When you started talking about driving a truck, what kind of routes were you on? Was that like within Sydney or regional New South Wales, or did you do interstate trips?
No, I just did local deliveries, mainly around the CBD in Sydney. Which is always fun with a truck and that much traffic. So.
Yeah. Oh, traffic in Sydney. Tell me about it. I live there myself. I know. I try to get to work by car, and you need to find very suitable time slots. And
the suitable time slots became earlier and earlier and earlier in the morning to basically avoid the worst of rush hour traffics. And these days, some don't even think that's even still possible in Sydney. Okay, so now you're in the rail industry. Horizon gave you a shot at the time. How attractive did you find the job or the job offer? The reason why I'm asking this is sometimes there are complaints that the rail industry struggles to make their jobs attractive enough for people outside the industry. Like attracting talent from outside the industry, because within the rail industry, the resource pool is rather limited, and often enough, railway companies complain that they can't find the right candidates, and they struggle to get outsiders from other industries in. They said, well, we would love to do that, but we don't know how.
Yeah, I guess it depends what you're looking for. It's well known that, the railway industry tends to pay quite well. So, that's always a bonus. But most of the roles that I've done in the railway industry, the hours are certainly not attractive to most people. It's 24/7 operations. It's weekend work. It's late nights, early mornings. And I found particularly in Queensland, there was no ability to plan anything. So when I was driving in Queensland, you would essentially get your roster about 32 hours in advance. So you'd ring up a special line at 2:00 in the afternoon, and you could find out that you were signing on at midnight the following night. So you'd get, essentially 32 hours notice that you'd be starting work. And for a lot of people, particularly if you've got kids, that's a hard life. It's hard to do things like even book a doctor's appointment, because while we had a master roster that might say, yes, you're supposed to have a morning shift that day, by the time you get to finding out what you're working, you're actually working an afternoon shift. So that makes it really, really difficult. And for a lot of people, that's just not tenable. Like, they just cannot do it. It was better down in Melbourne. We got more notice of what we were working, and if they said you were on mornings, then you were on mornings, unless you agreed to swap to afternoon. So it was a bit better down here in Melbourne, but it's still 24/7, and that does make it hard for a lot of people.
Yeah. I was still thinking about it when you were a freight coordinator yourself, whether that can't be improved. I mean, surely it should be possible to plan a roster. I mean, something can come in between always. Somebody can get off sick, and then somebody else needs to jump in and so on. But generally, it should be possible to roster with a little bit more advance notice, wouldn't you think?
To a certain extent, I guess. With freight, my experience with freight, it was difficult because while you may have been rostered for an 8-hour shift, there was a bit of a saying that you were good for 12. So it didn't matter if you were rostered for 8 hours, you were expected to drive for up to 12 hours in a shift, even if you were rostered for only 8. So it makes it hard, I guess, to roster too far ahead due to, downtime requirements between shifts and stuff like that. So if you add an extra 4 hours to a shift, that may then make you ineligible to start at what would have been your rostered time the following day because of the requirement to have, 12 hours off, for example. So it's doable, but it would take a lot of changes in the industry, I think.
Yeah. So this flexibility to work up to 12 hours, even though you were only rostered for 8, is that due to the length of the journeys that you say, well, you're sitting on a whole train and it needs to go from A to B. And if you were stopped working after 8 hours, it would mean that the train stops somewhere on the open line and then has to replace the driver. So you need to go for another, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 hours to finish the journey. Is that it?
Yeah, pretty much. there's no, it's the timetable for freight and coal trains isn't quite as set as passenger trains. You tend to get, put off into sidings to wait for other things to go through and stuff like that, which, messes with what time you were supposed to be where.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, after Brisbane, you said you came down to Melbourne. What made you go there, given that you went to Brisbane on purpose from Sydney, or you wanted to go to Brisbane? So what made you go away from Queensland and going down to Victoria?
I was ready for a big city again. I like Brisbane, but Brisbane is a bit of a giant country town. So having grown up in Sydney, I was ready for, move back to the big smoke. And Melbourne seemed like a good idea.
Yeah. Little side question, which I thought of earlier before I forget it. You mentioned you've got a motorcycle license. Did you ever own a bike?
Yes. I've spent a few years with only a motorcycle as transport. So I don't have one of my own at the moment. I borrow my flatmates when I feel like going out for a ride, but I do still get out there sometimes.
Yeah. What kind of motorcycle did you own when you owned one?
I had a V-Star 650, a Yamaha, so cruiser style.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I had a cruiser in mind. I was wondering whether it would be a Harley girl or something like that. But yeah, I mean, those things are expensive. Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a bike license in the first place, but you always think about something like this as you grow older. It could be one thing on the bucket list. And we've got a Harley dealer just a few K from where I live, and I had a look at the prices there. I mean, these machines all look very nice, but oh my God, yeah, you can get cars for that price, yeah. Really.
Yes. Thankfully, the Yamahas are significantly cheaper, so I stuck with those.
Yeah. Okay. So going to Melbourne, what kind of work did you do there? Did you basically stay in the freight part of the rail industry, or did you what kind of job did you do, and how did you bridge the gap from the job you had in Queensland to the job you had in Melbourne?
So I lined up a job with Metro Trains driving the passenger trains when I moved down. So that was interesting, going from the freight trains over to passenger trains, completely different style of driving, different environment, different priorities. So it was interesting, and it was a good experience. I enjoy driving both types of trains for very different reasons, though.
Yes, and was that a job ad that you applied for, or how did you get to that?
So Metro had advertised for drivers. So yeah, I saw that ad and stuck my hand up for it.
Yeah. I was in Melbourne in June at a conference, and part of that was the opportunity to visit the driver simulator in the Metro Academy. And so I sat at the simulator and drove the train, and then the driver trainer stood next to me, and now you accelerate up to 40 and now up to 60. And it's about, how do I know this if you're not standing there telling me? And, oh, well, this is route knowledge. And I thought, well, why can't you put up speed boards? Yeah, but, I mean, how can you? I mean, if you say, well, that's a line where you can go 80 all the way, that's relatively easy to remember. Yeah, I mean, that much route knowledge I can understand. But it was literally every few hundred meters, it was like a different speed limit. And I thought, well, if you try to memorize all this, you've got probably 300 speed limits across the network or something like that, if not more. Why can't you put up speed signs to make it a little bit easier to remember? Yeah, but it was my experience with Metro trains and driving the passenger trains in Melbourne. Yeah, I thought
it's quite hard. And I've had quite a few people ask me about becoming a train driver, and the first thing that I warn them about is that the training course is really, really intense, and it's a lot of information that you've got to learn in a very short amount of time. And it's not just information that you can kind of get into your head, do an exam, and then get rid of. You've got to retain that information, and you get quizzed on it for the next 12 months. And then you've got to remember it after that, because it's, at some point in your driving career, you're going to need to just know that when you're out there. So it's quite difficult to, learn all the information. But it's an interesting point you make about speedboards, because, having learnt to drive trains in 2 different states with 2 different safe working systems, Queensland does have speedboards. So where the speed changes along the track, there are boards. So that was an interesting thing for me coming down to Melbourne, and, suddenly just having to remember them and not having the reminders along the track was an interesting experience.
Yeah. We have speedboards in Perth as well. That's where I came from in my experience. And I thought that must be so much easier for the drivers. I mean, then that's like driving a car. I mean, if you drive a car, you have speedboards. That's just normal. It's you couldn't imagine expecting car drivers to say, well, you just have to know how fast you can go here. Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough to say, okay, in densely populated areas, you can only go 50. And even there, you've got signs reminding you of that. Yeah, remember, only go 50 in populated areas. So I couldn't really quite understand why Melbourne didn't go for that. And I mean, the argument that cost or so, I think if other railways can do it, then it should be possible to do it in Melbourne as well. And especially, I mean, not having speedboards there is a decision that has evolved over decades. I mean, it's not like, well, suddenly the speedboards were gone and we didn't put any new ones up. That this has been like this for forever. And so it's been a decision forever to not have speedboards, and I just found it peculiar. Yeah. So
yeah, just another one of those things that happens in the railways just because that's what's always been done.
So you already mentioned the rosters for drivers, that they were a bit more user-friendly in Melbourne. And maybe that's partly because the journey times for passenger trains are a bit more predictable than for freight trains, because, I mean, a passenger train is normally not stuck in a siding for hours and then you're suddenly late for your end of shift and so on. So how long did you do that train driving in Melbourne, and what happens next?
So I was a driver in Melbourne so I had my keys down here for almost 10 years. So I was a driver for 6 years almost, and then I stepped up into the principal driver role. And then I did that for about 18 months, and then I moved over to an operational training specialist role, where I put together the training materials and delivered the training for the new level crossing removal sections, before I moved over to Melbourne Airport Rail. So I was driving trains for, almost 10 years here in Melbourne.
Okay. So that training for level crossing removals, was that still for train drivers? And and was that part of the level crossing removal program, or was that more part of the train driver community but related to that project?
So it was part of Metro's training for the drivers, but as part of the level crossing removal program, I guess. So it was, the required training that needed to be delivered to the drivers to be able to, so they could drive those new sections.
And then suddenly, after nearly 10 years of driving, you ended up in a major project. How did this happen?
A little bit of fate. So I'd done my Masters of Project Management. I was almost finished it. I was on LinkedIn one day. I was trying to decide what I was going to do for my research project. And so I'd been looking at people that were working in projects for Metro, because having been at Metro for so long at that point, I wanted to do something that centred around Metro. So I was connecting with people that worked in projects at Metro, and one of those people was Lisa. And happened to comment on one of her posts, and we ended up having coffee. And she let me know that there was a role going on Melbourne Airport project that I might be suited for. So I threw in for that, and the rest is history.
Okay. So did you get this role based on studying project management anyway? So was it more the research project, or was it a job which just happened to fit your research project task?
So I actually ended up doing my research project on the level crossing and the HCMT project. But I guess the opportunity for the new role came about because I'd done my Masters of Project Management and because of my operational experience. So the role really suited somebody who had that operational background, but with an understanding of projects as well. So,
yeah. Lisa and you weren't the only women working on Melbourne Airport Rail, right? I mentioned in the pre-talk that we had that pretty much everybody I know who worked on Melbourne Airport Rail was female, which is probably not the full picture, but it just struck me as extraordinary to have that many female engineers and resources working on one project. Well, I would like you to tell me a little bit more about this, and whether it was really that out of the ordinary, and why you think how this came about.
It was a very interesting project to be working on from that perspective. So I think there was a real push to try and find good female talent for Melbourne Airport Rail project. And I think that comes from the timing of when the project was kind of really kicking off. You know, there was a general understanding that we needed to get more women into the rail industry, coupled with, leadership that was willing to push that as well. So I think, you kind of got to need to push yourself out of your comfort zone to increase female participation in the railway industry. We all have a tendency to, recruit people just like us. So in an industry that is largely male dominated, you do have to push yourself to actually go, you're not just like me, but you're actually going to be a good fit for this role. So I think leadership was pushing that. There was some good initiatives going within the project. We had the Women in Rail working groups, identifying issues that women in rail faced, and kind of, coming up with some ideas on how we could, create a better environment for everybody, whether that's, things like consciously choosing more gender neutral wording for job ads, highlighting, some of the flexible work options within the job ads. Just little things like that. So I think we did end up with a better gender balance on that project because it was a conscious decision and work was really put in to try and make that happen.
Yeah, and it's about putting the effort in, as you said, doing the small things, which I don't really think are such small things. They may look small, but they probably are big in regards of the effect they have. And then I think it almost becomes something self-perpetual that once, I mean, if you are a woman in the industry and then you see there's a project over there where effort is made to make it more suitable for women, that's attractive in itself. So it almost becomes something like a movement where women are more attractive to go there. And then, of course, they have their networks anyway. And then they tell others, well, this is great over here. You should try it out. Or there's another opening here. You should apply for that. In a similar way, how basically Lisa got you onto the project. Basically saying, well, I don't discard you from the start because you are a woman. It's more the opposite. If you are a woman and my intention is to get more women on a project, you are almost in a pole position where I said, well, I definitely give you a shot. I mean, you still need to prove that you are the right candidate for the role. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the last thing I think is a good idea in the industry is if you get people positions because of quotas. I personally believe that's the wrong way to go about it. If you don't get a job on merit, but you get a job on quota. But I think to give jobs on merit, you have to give people a fair shot. Yeah, and not just saying, well, if you are a male, then by nature you must have more merits than a woman, which is nonsense again. Yeah, so merits more in like looking at someone not as a man or a woman, but as a human being with certain experiences, with certain backgrounds, with certain what you can bring to the table, attitudes, motivation, that kind of things. I mean, if you would, for instance, tell me that you always liked driving things, maybe there's more to it than just driving vehicles. Maybe there's also an element of just driving things forward, driving progress, getting to a result, be it delivering a freight truck from point A to point B, or a freight train or a passenger train on time, or be it just to get stuff done, which is a typical project management task. Yeah, well, long rant there from my side, but so from your experience, I guess you would probably say it worked pretty well in Melbourne Airport Rail.
No, look, I think it was definitely on the right path. There's always things that still need to be improved. And I think, that's true wherever you are. And I think that's part of what makes a good environment, though, because you're always going to have speed bumps. You're always going to have people that, come in and then don't meet the expectations that are set. So I think it's also about responding to those situations which make a good environment. I think one of the big things, you mentioned not hiring women just for the sake of hiring women and, hiring on merit. And I think a big part of that is challenging your subconscious bias. We tend to have, subconscious thoughts about people when they sit down in front of us, whether it's, a kind of, confident, outspoken kind of, woman can be seen as bossy, whereas that's leadership potential in a man. So, it's acknowledging your own subconscious bias. And I think that's where you do get to being able to hire on merit when you actually see the truth of the merit in front of you.
I think it's also an attitude thing. I was invited in Melbourne to a Women in Engineering event several years back, it was way before COVID. And I presented there on one of my hobbies, which is basically career advice on how to do a LinkedIn profile and basically sell yourself better, but what I call personal branding. What I found was that in the audience, which was obviously, 95% women, and then the odd men for, like myself, for presenting something or so, a lot of the women there seem to have a chip on their shoulder, and the basic attitude like, I am not treated the same in the railway industry. And my sense was that this attitude in itself became a problem. Because they basically went into every interaction. you are a man and therefore you're mistreating me, or you're potentially mistreating me. So I'm distrusting you because in my experience you are one of those guys who treat women bad. And I thought this kind of attitude absolutely stood in their way of finding a better thing. Because I mean, even if I wanted to provide them opportunity, but then you are basically met with an attitude, but this is just talk. Yeah, you just want to do it to make yourself look better or something like that. And I mean, you know how it works in interviews. If you want to hire somebody, if you feel that the chemistry is not right, or they approach you in an adversarial way, that may disqualify them from actually getting the job. Yeah. Whereas if you come in with an attitude that, hey, I have specific skills because I'm a woman. Yes, I'm different, but I show you how I can be different in a positive way, in a way that actually helps the role, that helps making a good job and stuff like that. I found that the women with such a mindset, they didn't even complain about issues in the industry, about male-female issues in the industry. That didn't mean they neglected, they just didn't dwell on it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I guess it's always a bit of a hard situation, because yes, you do have people who can kind of just move on and, you know, go on with their career. But I guess for a lot of women, they've had such bad experiences that, you know, that level of trust just isn't there. And it can be, you know, quite hard to learn to trust those around you again when you've had such bad experiences. So
yeah, possibly. At the risk of this becoming slightly political, let's talk about the end of the airport rail project. I mean, when the last state budget in Victoria came out, the plug was pulled for this project in a quite spectacular way, I believe, because I mean, Melbourne Airport Rail was planned for a long time. Many people said it's way overdue. There seemed to be a massive commitment, also financial commitment, in both from the federal side and from the state side. So can you say anything about that? How it came that this project came to a stop, and could it have been avoided, something like that? I mean, not going into political parties and the government have done this and they shouldn't, and what. I'm still, and I'm not even a Melburnian. I'm still shocked that a project like this, which seemed to be well underway and set up in a very positive way, was just stopped from one day to the next.
I guess, look, there's no one real, you know, thing I think that brought the project to an end. And, you know, I can't claim to know the ins and outs of what happened in, you know, boardrooms with negotiations between, you know, politicians, airport, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I think it was a combination of, you know, just not being able to come to a satisfactory agreement that was going to fall within the right cost budget. You know, will it happen at some point? Yes, I think it will. You know, will that be in the next couple of years? Maybe. Will it, you know, be longer than that? Possibly. It's a hard one to kind of, you know, comment on.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not like a water tap that you can just turn off and turn on, or a light switch or something like this. But projects don't work like this. I mean, the resources for Melbourne Airport Rail are gone. Yeah, and they're definitely gone in the combination that you had on the project, and they may be gone for good. Yeah, I mean, there were some people even had their visa connected to the project, Lisa being one of them. So they basically face the situation: you either find a new job within 60 days, or you can leave the country. And so, and I also could imagine that even if people try to revive the Melbourne Airport Rail project, that people may have a certain a doubt, like, well, they turned it off once before, they may do it again. So it may be seen as a risky project to work on, and probably for good reasons. Yeah. So I think the resources are gone, and they are gone for good. And it will be very hard to reactivate that project. Yeah, there will always be, I believe, a dark shadow over it, because of that hiatus, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, look, it's my personal belief that, when they do finally build the airport rail, it won't look like it was going to for the previous project. I think it will be reinvented, and it will come back in a different form, whether that's, part of suburban rail loop, or something else completely. But I think it will resurface differently. And yes, I think you're right. People will probably be a little bit hesitant to jump on board that, depending on timing. But then that probably also depends on what other projects are going on around Melbourne at the time, because with the downturn of projects, it may be, one of the few options for projects in Melbourne. So if people want to stay in Melbourne, that may be their option.
Yeah, you're probably right. At the end of the day, people go where the work is. But yeah, I think a lack of loyalty, which is one aspect of it, like shutting down a project, basically expresses a lack of loyalty to the people working on the project, and only very, very few were lucky enough to find a job just like that somewhere else within MTM, for example. So what about you? I guess you're not in a situation where you would have to leave the country, being in Australia by nature, but I believe you are still outside the job. So what are the plans for you now?
So I chose to take a redundancy when they stopped the project. So kind of, my love is still rail. I think I really enjoy the rail industry. So if I can find myself a role in that kind of project management space within rail, that would be ideal. But, as I mentioned, with the downturn of rail projects in Melbourne, I may have to look into other industries.
That's probably the ideal opportunity to put a plug there for you, for anybody listening to the podcast and working on rail projects and maybe having a vacancy on a project. I think you have presented yourself as a very level-headed, down-to-earth, getting things done person. And so I think if there was an opportunity, then you would certainly be a good candidate. So let's just leave it there. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can do any more advertising for you at the moment, but I definitely cross my fingers that one, you can stay in the rail industry if that's what you want. I mean, you could go back to truck driving if you wanted that. Haven't driven trucks in Melbourne, at least as far as I know. So there may be some open loop to be closed. But if you want to stay in the rail industry, I think it would be very poor for an industry that constantly complains about lack of resources, to have resources available and then basically just ignore them, or not being able to find positions in the industry for those people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I must admit that was one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast to basically tell the world. So, well, sometimes the resources are just there. Yeah, they have the experience, they have the attitude, they have the love for the industry. What they don't have is a job. So do something about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, look, I do have a little bit of an interesting background in that, I've got both operational and project experience, which, there isn't a lot of in the project world. You tend to get a lot of people who have worked projects the entire time. So having that frontline operations experience, I think, bring a lot to a team. So, yeah.
I could imagine that consultancy should have a demand for skill sets like this. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure whether that's your cup of tea, because it's certainly a slightly different work environment than what it is in the in the operational railway industry. But well, we'll see. I mean, what leaves for me is to cross my fingers and wishing you all the best, that you find something that suits your interest sooner rather than later, of course. And thank you very much for your time being here, and also for being so open and upfront about all of this. I mean, talking about situations of unemployment is not something that everybody is comfortable with. So very grateful that you were happy to share that.
Thank you for the chat today. It was wonderful.
Great. So for all the listeners, I hope you found this useful. There were many aspects in there which I thought were useful for the industry, like how to attract people from outside railways into the railway industry, ways to build a career, maybe even giving people a bit of a role model, how you can start a career in railways, even though you came from somewhere else, retail industry, what have you. And if you like that podcast, then definitely check out the other episodes. I mean, Lisa Hockman's name came up a number of times, so I will put a link to her episode in the show notes. And there are also many other episodes, previous episodes, that you may find of interest. So please tell a friend about it. Make sure that you listen to more episodes. And until next time, keep it simple, and bye for now.
Hi, this is Doc Frank from the studio. I want to inform you about my latest and greatest training development, and it is all about the mindset of a high-capacity railway organization. What I found in my experience of training and consulting is that often you have projects for new technology which seem to be perfectly planned, which are very well executed, and they still don't lead to the success that was expected. And very often the reason for that is mindset. Key stakeholders that have what I call a legacy mindset, an outdated old ways of thinking, where the new technology is treated in the same way as the old one, but it's just not suitable to get the most out of the new technology. What I'm offering in this training course, which is called High Capacity Railway Mindset, is that every month there's a new training module with 5 examples of an outdated legacy mindset, the suggestion of a new mindset more suitable for a high capacity railway, and how to get from the old to the new mindset. So those modules will be repeated every month for an entire year. So in total, we are talking about 60 different examples how to get from an old mindset to a more suitable new mindset. And the cost for this is only $10 per example. So this can be paid monthly, this can be paid for a year. And then you have the usual service of an alumni community afterwards, where you can ask ongoing questions for at least 12 months after the training. You find more information and you can sign up on my training portal, docfranktraining.podia.com/mindset. I hope I see you at this training. It's really leading edge stuff. Nobody else in the world is training on this. And if you really want to explore the ultimate frontier of success in technology projects, then this is the training you need to take. Hi, it's Dr. Frank again. I hope you liked today's episode. I like to keep it as simple as possible, so I only have one single request for you. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends and colleagues about it. That's all I want, because that's a service that I'm providing to the industry, and I would like as many people as possible to listen to this podcast and learn something from it. So please share, and until next time, keep it simple and bye for now. Thank you for listening.